"Make her kneel," Thomas Caldwell ordered. "She is a political bride, not a queen." The command crossed Moon Hall and settled beneath the silver ceiling like a challenge no one wished to answer. Sophie Bennet stood before the moon altar in a pale wedding gown, her face hidden behind the veil her mother had left her, while the leaders of every northern pack watched from curved rows of black stone. The fabric brushed softly against her cheeks, turning each breath warm and close. In her hands, she held no flowers, only the treaty Thomas had demanded she swear before the Alpha King. Its final clause surrendered Pine Hollow's land, roads, and governing rights to the Royal Council. Those were not the terms she had accepted. "Speak the oath," Thomas said. Sophie heard the quiet expectation behind him. They expected gratitude from the healer whose people had received winter grain. They expected obedience from an Omega who had arrived without wealth, guards, or family influence. They expected her to exchange freedom for survival and call it peace. She lifted her chin beneath the veil. "No," ripple of laughter moved through the nobles. Thomas smiled as if her refusal proved his point. "Your pack survives because this kingdom showed mercy. You were brought here to complete an alliance, not question it." "An alliance requires two willing sides," Sophie replied. "This document leaves only one." The laughter weakened. Across the altar, Logan Blackwood remained motionless in his formal black coat edged with silver. The Alpha King had entered the ceremony expecting a political bride chosen by his council, a woman who would sign, smile, and disappear behind the needs of the crown. Yet his silver-gray eyes stayed fixed on Sophie with growing attention. Thomas raised the treaty for the council to see. "She is concealing evidence beneath that veil. Search her." No guard moved. Thomas turned toward Logan. "Your Majesty, command her to kneel." Logan's expression hardened. "She has answered you." "Then remove the veil," Thomas insisted. "Let the court see what Pine Hollow sent us." Sophie felt the room close around her. The silver threads against her skin seemed suddenly alive, each embroidered symbol warming as moonlight passed through the glass ceiling. Logan stepped toward her, but he did not reach for the veil. He stopped a few feet away. "Do you trust me?" he asked quietly. Sophie looked at him through the pale fabric. She did not trust the throne. She did not trust the council. She trusted only the truth sewn into the veil and the choice that had brought her here. "I trust the truth," she said. Thomas lost patience and reached toward the silver cloth himself. The instant his fingers touched its edge, the moon altar awakened. Light rushed through the carved stone in a bright silver wave. A wind with no earthly source swept across the hall, lifting Sophie's veil free and carrying it behind her like a banner. Moonlight touched the crown-shaped mark beneath her hairline. It began to glow. Every moonstone in the chamber answered. The royal guards lowered themselves to one knee. Pack leaders bowed their heads. Even Logan's wolf recognized the ancient power before his mind understood it, and the Alpha King bent before the woman his council had called merely a bride. Thomas stepped back, his certainty gone. Sophie stood uncovered at the center of the kingdom, while the throne itself revealed what everyone else had failed to see. 6 days earlier, she had been a healer with no medicine left. No one in Moonhall yet knew how close Thomas had come to erasing her before she arrived. 6 days earlier, Pine Hollow woke beneath a sky the color of frozen steel. Snow had buried the narrow roads, covered the roofs of the small cabins, and turned the forest beyond the pack boundary into a wall of white silence. Inside the healing house, Sophie Bennet stood before a nearly empty shelf, counting what remained. 2 bundles of dried feverfew, half a jar of willow bark, 1 bottle of tonic. Not enough for the families waiting outside. A young boy lay beneath a wool blanket near the fireplace, his cheeks flushed with fever while his mother sat beside him with both hands clasped together. "I cannot pay you," the woman whispered. Sophie measured the last spoonful of tonic into a cup. "Then there is nothing to discuss." She added warm water and carried it to the boy. The mother looked toward the empty bottle. "What will you give the next patient?" Sophie kept her expression calm. "I will find another way." She had said those words many times that winter. Sometimes another way meant walking 4 miles through deep snow to search for roots beneath frozen ground. Sometimes it meant giving away her own meal. Kindness had become costly in Pine Hollow, but Sophie refused to treat it like a privilege reserved for people who could afford it. Near noon, the sound of carriage wheels reached the village. 4 black coaches entered through the eastern gate, followed by soldiers wearing the silver crest of Northreach. Thomas Caldwell stepped from the first carriage in a dark formal coat. He looked past the hungry families, the empty market stalls, and the children carrying firewood. His attention settled on Sophie. The pack elders gathered everyone inside the meeting hall. Thomas placed a sealed document on the central table and announced that Alpha King Logan Blackwood was offering 30 wagons of grain, medicine for the winter, and royal protection for the northern trade road. Relief moved through the room so quickly that several people began to cry. Then Thomas named the price. Sophie Bennett will travel to Blackwood Citadel and enter a political marriage with the king. Every face turned toward her. The elders spoke of duty and sacrifice. No one asked whether she was afraid. Sophie approached the table and read the first 2 pages of the agreement. The supplies arrive before I leave. Thomas lifted one eyebrow. That is not the usual order. Neither is asking one woman to carry the survival of an entire pack. She placed one finger against the document. 30 wagons of grain. Medicine for every family. Armed protection for the trade road. Written confirmation that Pine Hollow keeps its land and governing rights. Thomas agreed too quickly. That frightened her more than refusal would have. He signed the added conditions and pressed his seal into the wax. Sophie watched the silver symbol appear. A crescent moon beneath a narrow crown. She had seen it before on a ring her mother kept locked inside a cedar box and had forbidden Sophie to touch. By sunset, the first supply wagons crossed the gate. Only then did Sophie give her answer. I will go. Thomas smiled as though he had won. Sophie looked again at the seal and understood that the marriage proposal carried a secret older than the winter. She had just agreed to enter the palace of a king she had never met, guided by the mark of a father she barely remembered. That evening, after the last supply wagon had been counted and the medicine carried into the healing house, Sophie returned to the small cabin where she had lived with her mother. The rooms felt unfamiliar beneath the weight of her decision. A traveling cloak waited beside the door. 2 plain dresses had been folded into a leather case. By sunrise, she would leave Pine Hollow for a palace she had never seen and a marriage she had never wanted. Sophie lit a lamp and placed Thomas Caldwell's agreement on the kitchen table. The silver seal caught the flame. A crescent moon beneath a narrow crown. She crossed to the cedar box her mother had kept beneath the floorboards. As a child, Sophie had once reached for the key, only to have her mother close both hands around hers. Not until the kingdom comes looking, she had said. Sophie had believed it was another warning shaped by grief. Now she understood that her mother had been waiting for this exact night. The key rested inside an old sewing basket. Sophie opened the box. A silver veil lay folded across several documents, its fine threads embroidered with moons, crowns, and lines that resembled rivers on a map. Beneath it rested the forbidden ring. The symbol on its face matched Thomas's seal, but the metal felt older and carried tiny words around its edge. An oath belongs to the willing. Sophie unfolded the first letter. Her mother's handwriting remained steady until the final lines. Your father was not merely a royal clerk. He served as the royal oath-keeper, trusted to preserve the true agreements between the crown and every pack under its protection. He discovered that Thomas Caldwell had been changing treaties after the Alpha King approved them. Weak packs surrendered land they had never agreed to surrender. Political brides lost rights they had been promised. Your father gathered proof, but he disappeared before he could place it before the throne. Sophie lowered the page as memories returned in fragments. Her father kneeling to fasten her winter boots. His voice reading beside the fire. The final morning when he promised to return before the snow melted. She had waited through 15 springs. Another document lay beneath the letter. It was an earlier version of the Pine Hollow Agreement, written years before the current crisis. Its language protected the pack's land, trade routes, and right to govern itself. Sophie spread the silver veil over the page. The embroidery aligned with the treaty's borders. When moonlight entered through the window, several threads glowed, revealing hidden sentences stitched between the visible patterns. Her mother had preserved the original clauses inside the fabric itself. A smaller note had been sewn into the hem. Sophie, Thomas must never see your face before you stand at the moon altar. The mark beneath your hair is not a shameful birthmark. It is the last sign of the first Luna sovereigns. The altar will either recognize you or remain silent, but Thomas cannot be allowed to stop you from reaching it. Sophie touched the faint crown-shaped mark near her hairline. Her mother had always arranged her hair to cover it. Now the reason stood before her in silver thread and fading ink. Thomas had not selected an ordinary healer because she was easy to control. He had chosen the daughter of the man who could expose him. Sophie folded the original agreement into the veil's hidden lining and placed the ring on her finger. Outside, snow moved softly across Pine Hollow. Inside, she prepared to enter the king's palace carrying the truth across her face. The royal convoy left Pine Hollow before sunrise, following a narrow road through forests heavy with snow. Sophie sat alone inside the second carriage, the silver veil arranged over her hair and the original treaty hidden inside its lining. The ring on her finger felt colder than the window glass. Every mile carried her farther from the healing house, the empty shelves, and the people who had trusted her to return with more than a marriage contract. By midday, the road climbed into the northern hills. Wind swept across the ridge, pushing snow into deep banks along the wheels. The lead carriage stopped near a steep bend where a merchant family had become stranded. One axle had sunk into the frozen edge of the road, and their small wagon leaned toward a ditch. Thomas Caldwell remained inside his heated coach. Several guards discussed how to move around the obstruction without delaying the royal party. Sophie opened her door. "We cannot leave them here," she said. A guard looked uncertain. "Lady Bennet, the palace expects us before dark." "Then we should help quickly." She stepped into the snow before anyone could argue. The cold reached through her boots as she crossed to the wagon. A mother held a bundled child while an older man tried to free the wheel with a wooden lever. Sophie removed 2 heavy crates from the back, making the wagon light enough to shift. A man in a plain black officer's coat joined her without introduction. He was tall, with dark hair, silver-gray eyes, and a calm expression that seemed untouched by the wind. Together, they moved the remaining supplies several feet from the road. "Most political brides would remain in the carriage," he said. Sophie glanced at him. "Most stranded families would prefer not to freeze while important people discuss schedules." Something close to amusement passed through his eyes. "You speak freely for someone traveling to marry a king. Should marriage take away a person's voice? Some courts might say it changes where that voice belongs." Sophie straightened and brushed snow from her gloves. "A voice does not belong to a throne." The officer studied her more carefully. Her wolf, quiet for most of her life, stirred beneath her ribs with an unfamiliar warmth. It was not fear. It felt like recognition without a memory. The man seemed to feel it too. His attention shifted to the silver veil when the wind lifted one embroidered edge from beneath her cloak. The symbols caught the pale daylight. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Sophie pulled the fabric closer. "It belonged to my mother." "Those markings appear in sealed records from the old oathkeepers." Her pulse quickened. Why would an escort officer know that? He looked toward Thomas's carriage before answering. Because someone should have noticed the same symbol appearing on treaties that were later changed. The merchant wagon was finally returned to the road. The family thanked Sophie and continued south. She turned back to the officer. "What is your name?" "Logan." He offered no title. "And why are you traveling with my convoy?" "To understand the woman Northreach has been promised." Sophie's expression hardened. "Then ask honestly instead of observing from behind a uniform." Logan accepted the rebuke without anger. "Why did you agree to the marriage?" "Because saving my people was my choice." She held his gaze. "Being owned is not." For one quiet moment, the snow, the guards, and the waiting carriages seemed to fade. Logan's wolf recognized the bond before he allowed himself to name it. More importantly, he recognized the danger surrounding her. Thomas had not delivered the king a passive bride. He had brought the daughter of the missing oath-keeper directly into the palace, carrying evidence across her face. When the convoy moved again, Logan rode beside Sophie's carriage. By the time Blackwood's citadel appeared beyond the snowy ridge, he understood that the council had not arranged a marriage. They had attempted to hide a witness inside one. Blackwood's citadel rose from the mountain like a fortress carved from winter itself, its dark stone towers cutting into the pale evening sky while silver banners moved above the gates. Sophie watched from the carriage as rows of guards stood at attention along the courtyard. The moment the door opened, cold air rushed beneath her veil. She stepped down and found Logan waiting at the foot of the stairs, no longer dressed as a traveling officer. A formal black coat with silver trim rested across his shoulders, and every guard around him had lowered his head. Sophie stopped. The truth settled before anyone spoke. Alpha King Logan Blackwood, Thomas announced from behind her, as though the surprise had been part of his welcome. Sophie looked directly at the man who had questioned her beside the snowy road. "You could have told me." Logan's expression remained calm, but regret appeared in his silver-gray eyes. "I should have. You wanted to see how I behaved when I did not know who you were." "Yes. Then you tested honesty by hiding the truth." Several courtiers near the entrance shifted at her tone. Logan did not rebuke her. That was unfair. His answer was so immediate that Sophie had no prepared response. Thomas stepped between them with a polished smile. "The court is waiting. Lady Bennet must be presented before the evening bell." The reception hall glowed with chandeliers and hundreds of candles, yet Sophie felt colder inside than she had on the mountain road. Noble families filled the room in velvet, silk, and silver jewelry. Their attention moved over her plain blue-gray gown, her travel-worn boots, and the veil hiding her face. Disappointment followed curiosity. Victoria Hayes stood near the royal platform in a deep green dress, surrounded by women whose jewels could have supplied Pine Hollow for an entire winter. She looked Sophie over slowly. "So this is the winter payment." Soft laughter moved through the hall. Sophie felt every sound against the veil. She did not lower her head. "Payments belong to debts," she said. "An alliance should belong to people who choose it." Victoria's smile tightened. "A political bride does not usually arrive with opinions." Then the court has confused silence with dignity. The laughter vanished. Logan stood several feet away, watching her with an attention that felt more honest than the disguise had. Thomas approached before Victoria could answer. "The veil remains in place until the ceremony," he said. His voice was courteous, but the command beneath it was clear. "No exceptions." Sophie touched the edge of the silver fabric. "Why?" "Royal tradition." Queen Mother Eleanor Blackwood, seated beside the throne, lifted her gaze. She was a composed woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. "That is not a tradition of this house," she said. Thomas turned smoothly. "It is a precaution for the security of the alliance." Eleanor studied the embroidered border of Sophie's veil. Recognition passed across her face so quickly that only Sophie seemed to notice. The Queen Mother rose and came closer. "Who made this?" "My mother." Eleanor's fingers stopped inches from the silver thread without touching it. "And her family name?" "Bennet." The older woman drew a quiet breath. Thomas stepped forward at once. "Lady Bennet has traveled far. She should be shown to her rooms." He summoned 2 attendants and instructed them never to leave Sophie alone outside the royal wing. The order sounded protective, but Sophie heard the shape of confinement inside it. As she turned to leave, Logan spoke behind her. "I will meet with you before the ceremony. No oath will be taken without your agreement." Thomas's jaw tightened. Sophie saw it. Later that night, while attendants prepared a silver wedding gown in the adjoining room, voices carried through the corridor outside her chamber. Thomas spoke in a low, urgent tone to the royal clerk. "Replace the oath before dawn. Remove the clause protecting Pine Hollow. Once she speaks the words, the land belongs to the council." Sophie stood motionless behind the closed door, one hand pressed against the hidden treaty sewn into her veil. The palace had not been waiting for a bride. It had been waiting for her silence. Sophie waited until the footsteps faded before opening the chamber door. The corridor beyond was empty except for 2 lamps burning low against the stone walls. She took the silver veil from the dressing table, folded it beneath her cloak, and followed the sound of distant voices toward the oldest wing of the citadel. If Thomas intended to rewrite the oath before dawn, she needed the Alpha King to see the proof before the ceremony. The royal archive stood behind a narrow iron door at the end of the library. Logan was already there, leaning over a long table covered with sealed treaties. He had removed his formal coat, and the black shirt beneath it made him look less like a ruler and more like the man who had helped free a merchant wagon from the snow. He looked up when Sophie entered. "You should not be walking through the palace alone. Then your regent should not be changing my wedding oath outside my door." Logan became still. Sophie placed the veil on the table and unfolded the hidden lining. Moonlight from the tall windows touched the silver thread, revealing rows of stitched words beneath the decorative pattern. "My father was the royal oath keeper," she said. "He discovered that Thomas Caldwell altered treaties after they were approved. My mother hid the original clauses here." Logan read in silence. His expression changed as each line exposed another betrayal. Pine Hollow retained its land. No political marriage could erase local authority. No Omega could be transferred between pacts without consent. Trade roads belonged to the communities that maintained them. Logan crossed to a cabinet and removed the official version prepared for the ceremony. He placed it beside the veil. The differences were immediate. Thomas had replaced protection with surrender. "I sign neither of these changes," Logan said. "Yet they carry your seal. Someone has been using my authority as a mask." Anger sharpened his voice, but he kept it controlled. "I will have Thomas removed from the ceremony tonight." Sophie shook her head. "Then he will say the documents were forged. His allies will bury the evidence before sunrise." Logan looked at her. "What do you suggest?" "Let him read the false oath in front of every pack leader. Let him explain why it does not match the king's record. Let the entire court hear what he believed no one would question." Logan studied her as though seeing the full measure of her for the first time. "You would walk into the ceremony knowing he plans to trap you?" "I walked into this palace knowing someone wanted my silence." Sophie folded her hands over the table to keep them steady. "Fear does not make the truth less necessary." A floorboard creaked beyond the archive door. Logan moved closer, lowering his voice. "Someone is listening." Sophie heard the faint retreat of a shoe against stone. Thomas, or someone reporting to him, had learned enough to become dangerous. She forced herself to remain calm. Then let him believe he heard everything. Logan understood. He raised his voice just enough to carry into the corridor. "The oath will proceed exactly as the council prepared it." Sophie followed his lead. "Then I will do what is expected of me." Silence answered from outside, followed by footsteps moving away. Only when they disappeared did Logan speak again. "I owe you an apology." Sophie met his eyes. "For which part?" "For hiding who I was. For allowing the council to choose a bride before asking whether she had a choice. For believing duty excused ignorance." He did not reach for her hand. He did not ask to be forgiven. "I cannot undo that tonight, but I can promise this. No oath will bind you without your consent." Sophie wanted to trust him, but trust was not a gift she could offer because his voice was sincere. It had to survive action. "Then prove it when the court is watching." Logan nodded. Together, they placed the original treaty back inside the veil. By morning, the evidence would enter Moon Hall on Sophie's face, hidden in plain sight. And Thomas would be the one who brought it into the light. Morning arrived beneath a pale sky, and Moon Hall filled before the first bell finished ringing. Pack leaders stood in curved rows beneath the silver glass ceiling, their formal coats marked with the colors of their territories. Nobles crowded the upper gallery. Royal guards lined the black stone walls. At the center, the moon altar waited beneath a shaft of cold light. Sophie entered alone. The silver veil covered her face, and the original treaty rested within its hidden lining. Each step sounded louder than the last. She could feel the court measuring her plain family name, her Omega status, and the pack that had sent her in exchange for grain. Thomas Caldwell stood beside the altar with the false agreement in his hands. His expression was composed, but satisfaction warmed his eyes. Logan waited across from Sophie in a formal black coat edged with silver. He did not smile. He did not look away. Thomas raised his voice. "We gather to secure peace between Northreach and Pine Hollow through a binding royal marriage." Sophie listened as he described generosity, protection, and unity. Then he began the oath. The first lines matched the agreement she had accepted. The final clauses did not. Upon this union, Thomas read, Pine Hollow transfers all land, trade authority, and governing rights to the Royal Council. Its citizens will submit to reassignment when required for the stability of the crown. A murmur moved through the hall. Sophie felt heat gather beneath the veil, but her hands remained still. Thomas extended the document. "Repeat the oath." She looked toward the people assembled behind him. Some appeared uneasy. Others seemed entertained by the thought of an Omega resisting a royal ceremony. Victoria Hayes watched from the front row, her expression carefully guarded. Sophie returned her attention to Thomas. "That is not the agreement I accepted." His smile did not change. "It is the agreement approved by the crown." Logan spoke from across the altar. "Show me the seal." Thomas handed him the document. Logan studied it, then lifted his gaze. "This carries my mark." "As every lawful treaty does," Thomas replied. "It does not carry my language." The hall became quiet. Thomas turned toward Sophie before Logan could continue. "The bride has arrived with a hidden document and an invented family claim. She now attempts to disrupt a lawful alliance because she regrets the duty she accepted." A few nobles laughed. Sophie heard one of them whisper that Pine Hollow should be grateful anyone had offered to save it. Thomas stepped closer. "You were purchased with winter grain. Do not pretend you came here as an equal." The words struck the room harder than a shout. Sophie thought of the medicine shelves, the child beneath the wool blanket, and the 30 wagons crossing Pine Hollow's gate. She had never regretted saving them. She regretted only that men like Thomas believed kindness made a person easier to own. "My people received aid promised by the king," she said. "They did not sell me." Thomas's expression tightened. "You are a political bride. Nothing more." Sophie lifted her chin. "Then why are you afraid of what is beneath my veil?" The gallery fell silent. Thomas turned to Logan. "Order her searched." Logan remained still. "She has not consented." "Your Majesty, she is challenging the authority of the throne." "No," Logan said. "She is challenging yours." Thomas's control finally slipped. He raised the false treaty toward the council. "She has forged evidence to steal power from this kingdom. Make her kneel." No guard moved. Sophie could hear her own breathing beneath the silver fabric. Logan stepped closer, stopping several feet away. His voice lowered. "Do you trust me?" She remembered the archive, his apology, and the promise that mattered only if he kept it before witnesses. "I trust the truth." Thomas looked from the silent guards to the watching nobles. Then impatience defeated caution. He reached towards Sophie himself. The moment his fingers touched the edge of the veil, the moon altar awakened. Silver light raced through the carvings of the moon altar and spread across the floor in widening circles. Thomas pulled his hand back, but the veil was already lifting from Sophie's face. It rose without wind, every embroidered thread shining as though moonlight had been trapped inside it for years. The fabric slipped behind her shoulders and settled across the altar. Silence took the hall. The faint mark beneath Sophie's hairline brightened into a silver crown shaped around a crescent moon. One by one, the moonstones set into the walls answered. Their light moved upward toward the glass ceiling, turning the entire chamber pale and clear. Sophie heard the royal guards lower themselves to one knee. Pack leaders bowed their heads. Even the nobles in the gallery stopped breathing long enough for the truth to become undeniable. Across from her, Logan's silver-gray eyes widened. His wolf recognized what his mind had not yet named. The Alpha King bent one knee before her, not from defeat, but from an ancient law older than his throne. Thomas stared at Sophie as if the woman beneath the veil had become someone impossible. "This proves nothing," he said, though his voice had lost its authority. Queen Mother Eleanor rose from her seat. "It proves what your records tried to erase." She stepped toward the altar, her gaze fixed on the glowing mark. The first Luna sovereigns were the guardians of every binding oath between the crown and the Pax. Their bloodline carried the authority to reject any agreement formed through coercion, deception, or stolen consent. Sophie looked at Eleanor. My mother never told me the full truth. She told you enough to survive it, Eleanor replied. The silver veil began to change. Lines of hidden stitching appeared across its surface, then stretched into light above the altar. Words formed against the far wall, large enough for every person in Moon Hall to read. The original Pine Hollow Treaty appeared first. Land protected. Local authority preserved. Marriage voluntary. Movement between pacts based on consent. Then a second document appeared beside it. Thomas's altered version. The stolen clauses stood exposed in cold silver light. A murmur moved through the court, this time without laughter. Logan rose slowly and faced Thomas. You changed treaties under my seal. Thomas straightened. I protected the kingdom from weak pacts that could not govern themselves. You protected your own control, Sophie said. Victoria Hayes stepped out from the front row. Her face had lost its earlier contempt. In both hands, she carried a bundle of letters tied with green ribbon. He promised my family land after the marriage, she said. He also ordered me to spread rumors about Sophie so the court would not question why she remained veiled. Thomas turned toward her. You do not understand what you're admitting. I understand now, Victoria answered. She placed the letters on the altar. Other pack leaders began speaking at once. One recognized a changed trade clause. Another named a daughter sent into marriage under false terms. The pattern widened until Thomas stood at the center of his own evidence. Logan removed the regent's silver insignia from the council table. Thomas Caldwell, your authority is suspended. You will answer before a public tribunal, with every affected pack permitted to testify. Several voices demanded immediate punishment. Sophie felt anger rise around her, hot and eager. She could have let it carry the room. Instead, she lifted one hand. No private judgment. No secret decision. He will receive the fairness he denied others. The hall quieted again. Thomas looked at her with disbelief. Mercy, he had mistaken. For weakness. Fairness, he had never expected from the person he tried to silence. Logan turned towards Sophie. Before the assembled kingdom, he lowered himself to one knee once more. I will not call you my wife because a council arranged it, he said. I will not ask you to complete an oath built on fraud. Tell me what you choose, and the crown will honor it. Sophie looked at the fallen veil, the exposed treaties, and the people still bowed before her. For the first time since leaving Pine Hollow, the next step belonged entirely to her. Sophie let the silence remain until every person in Moon Hall understood that no one else would make the decision for her. Logan stayed on one knee before the altar, his head lowered, while silver light rested across the black stone floor. She could feel the expectations gathering again, softer now but no less dangerous. Some wanted her to accept the crown. Others wanted her to forgive the king. Pine Hollow wanted safety. The court wanted certainty. Sophie had spent her life giving people what they needed. This time, she would not confuse generosity with surrender. Stand, she told Logan. He rose, but he did not step closer. I will not complete the ceremony today, she said. A quiet breath passed through the hall. The oath was built on deception, and no honest future should begin by pretending that does not matter. Logan nodded. Agreed. Sophie turned toward the pack leaders. Pine Hollow will remain independent. Its roads, land, and resources belong to its people. No marriage will ever be used to settle a debt between packs. No Omega will lose property, work, family, or freedom because someone stronger finds it convenient. Thomas stood beneath guard near the council table, listening as the system he had shaped began to disappear. Sophie continued. Every royal treaty will be read in public before it is signed. An independent oath council will preserve the original language. The Alpha King and any future queen will be bound by the same law they expect others to obey. No one laughed now. Eleanor stepped beside the altar. The old council can be restored, she said. Its records still exist beneath the Western Archive. Victoria placed her letters with the other evidence. My family will testify, she said quietly. So will I. Sophie met her gaze. There was no friendship between them yet, but there was truth, and truth was enough for a beginning. Logan looked toward the royal clerk. Prepare the reforms exactly as she has stated. Send copies to every northern pack. No agreement will take effect until their representatives have reviewed it. He gave the order before asking what Sophie would choose. That mattered more than any declaration of devotion could have. He was changing the law without demanding her affection as payment. The tightness in her chest eased. Logan faced her again. You may return to Pine Hollow with full royal protection. You may remain as royal oathkeeper. Or you may help me build a new alliance, not as an obligation, but as an equal. Sophie looked at the man who had first met her in a borrowed uniform. He had misjudged her, but he had listened when she challenged him. He had apologized without excuses. When the entire court demanded control, he had given her space to choose. I will stay long enough to write the new treaty, she said. After that, we will decide what comes next as two people, not two titles. Warmth reached Logan's eyes. That is more than fair. 3 weeks later, the pack representatives returned to Moon Hall. The new laws had been reviewed, amended, and approved in open session. Pine Hollow's first winter shipment had become a permanent trade agreement rather than the price of a woman's freedom. Sophie stood before the moon altar in a blue-silver gown, her face uncovered. The veil lay folded beside the original treaty, preserved now as evidence of what courage had carried into the palace. Eleanor placed the moonstone crown in Sophie's hands, but did not raise it above her head. A crown is offered, she said. It is never owed. Sophie looked at Logan. He held out his hand, not as a king commanding a bride, but as a man asking her to walk beside him. She placed her hand in his. I choose the alliance, she said. And I choose to discover whether love can grow inside the truth. Logan smiled. Then we begin there. When Sophie finally accepted the crown, the hall bowed again. This time, she did not stand before them as a hidden heir or a political sacrifice. She stood as the healer who had protected her people, the woman who had refused to kneel, and the queen who taught a kingdom that true strength could be gentle without ever becoming weak.